Everybody. I'm Peter Wanders, president of the ranch. On behalf of our board, our national council members, my colleagues, I'm just really thrilled to host you here today. The ranch is really such a special place. Our mission is to foster transformative experiences through art making, and that happens every day here on the ranch, so we're thrilled you're here for the lecture. But in the studios, there's some really amazing art being made. But really, what's happening over there isn't so much about the art as about the people. And I really encourage you to go over. It is such a diverse group of people from different colleges around the country, different states, all over, ages, interests, backgrounds. It's a fascinating group. And they are here to connect with each other in community. And that is just such a rare and special thing in this world. And I'm going to ask you to lean into that, engage with that. Go up and talk to somebody. And if you're in a hurry, you can stop at the children's building because the kids love to talk about their art too. But engage with this community, and thank all of you national council members in the room that helped make that community for us possible. It's really a legacy we are honored to carry forward, and it's really important that we all work to secure that going forward. This series has a title, Underwriter. Mel and Adam Lewis underwrite the program in honor of Toby Devan Lewis, a curator, a mentor to so many artists, curators, collectors, a mentor to so many of us here on campus and in town. And we're thrilled by the honor of recognizing her here. We have a group of individuals that also underwrite this series. I'm going to go through my list and I have to read it. Sarah Arison and Tom Willem, Jill and Jay Bernstein, Melissa and John Seriel, Rona and Jeff Citron, Ann Cook and Charlie Moss, Eleanor and Domenico Di Soleil, Sherry and Joe Felson, Susan Gordon and Scott Francis. I got to keep you guys straight. Anna and Matt Friedman, Jennifer and Brian Hermelin, Barbara and John Lee, Liza and John Mauk, Katie and Amnon Rodan, Lee and Reggie Smith, Ellen Sussman, and Robin and Mark Tebby. I can add your name to the list next week. Just hit me up after the talk. But it supports this series. It also supports the visiting artists that are coming through campus year-round, and it's just really so important to our success. We have a few corporate sponsors, Christie's Auction House, Pure Insurance, United Airlines, and of course, we partner with Culture Magazine for our media partner. Sarah Harrelson, the founder and editor-in-chief of Cultured, helped as our creative director around the series this year, and we really appreciate her support. I'm going to change papers. Excited to get us onto our program today. Moderating our conversation is Ruba Katrib. She is the chief curator and director of curatorial affairs at MoMA PS1, where she oversees the museum's programs and is a member of their leadership team. Prior to PS1, she was the curator at the Sculpture Center in New York for 6 years. Too many amazing shows to list, so we'll go quickly over to Kelly, but really honored to have you here and have you lead our conversation. Kelly is a Los Angeles-based artist, really recognized for sort of innovative sculptures and the visual language that emphasizes impermanence and in the natural world. Ruba's going to bring out a lot more depth in that conversation, but excited to have her here. She has received some notable accolades, including MoCA Los Angeles 12th Distinguished Women in the Arts Award, the LACMA Art and Technology Grant, among many others. A recent solo exhibition was a major showcase that traveled around San Jose Museum of Art, Frye Museum of Art, the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Diego. Again, a list of exhibitions and collections that is so amazing, but I want to get to the conversation. Thrilled to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really thrilled to be here in conversation with Kelly, and I just want to thank Anderson Ranch and Sarah Harrelson for the invitation and for the hospitality. I really don't want to leave now that I'm here, but it's a short trip, and I'm really glad to be here. Also with Kelly, who's an incredible artist and friend. Oops, let me go back. And I just want to give a little bit of background and history into our relationship and how we met, and through that start talking about Kelly's work. And I knew of Kelly for some time, but we met in 2016. And I'd seen her work, I'd seen images of her work, but I was able to see this show at Francois Gabali Gallery in Los Angeles, and I was really struck by the practice, the ambition, the material investigation. And so then I went to Kelly's studio, which was at that time in Inglewood, and we discussed a potential exhibition at Sculpture Center. So then we embarked on this project that, here I'll show some more images just from this show, so you get an idea until we get to the sculpture center portion. And we'll go back and forth between images.
Yeah, it's like an appetizer of images right now.
Maybe I'll stop here and then we'll go to
Okay.
Sculpture Center because there's so many. I'll just like a little preamble. So we embarked on the show at Sculpture Center, which is in the lower level galleries. I don't know if anyone's been there, but you should definitely visit if you have a chance. And Kelly was really responsive towards the space, which is idiosyncratic, and you'll see it in a second. And to produce work for the show, it was a mix of existing works and new works, and we connected Kelly with Urban Glass, which is a glass studio in Brooklyn, and she made a bunch of new work there, which was really exciting. And then we were just talking a little bit about that because it's led to a lot of work.
Long relationships that turned into multiple long relationships, which has been amazing, that have continued to just to today, actually, which is incredible.
Yeah, and I think, part of, I think it's important to also note, like when we were setting up that conversation with Urban Glass and like the amount of expertise that Kelly brought to the discussion and the dialogue she had with the technicians, like it was another level, and I was just really impressed by that because, Kelly's not just an artist working in glass, she's really like pushing the form and the medium, and her practice really started in photography though, so I think that's really important to remember as we talk about the evolution of her work, especially as it relates to time. And you can see here like these displays that were kind of a precursor to what we'll see later with all of these glass works and candles and other pieces. And let me just move, I'm gonna like skip.
Yeah.
So there's the Sculpture Center, so you can see this unique
It's a very
space.
confusing space if you've never been there, because it's the basement of a former trolley repair
Yes, exactly.
facility.
Yes.
So I had to go, I don't know how many times I went before I kind of understood the space myself. But a very difficult space, but I love difficult spaces. And I don't know how much we'll talk about that today, but I was really drawn to the space because of its history and also how complex and how many kind of coves there were. So I was able to really kind of settle myself into different niches.
This is a good one. And I think like that, and the show is called Long Exposure, which was also the title of a work in the show. And so that idea of like photography and time comes into play. And I'll just say one last thing before I turn it over to like a question. But I just, I think what's so fascinating about Kelly's work is like how she distills materials into their true essence in a way. So it's really like about exploring the nature of matter and how that feeds into the conceptual elements. And I just want to also preface this by saying that material investigation is also increasingly incorporated more of Kelly's own biography, and like that merger I think is really fascinating. So we'll talk about that. And I just want to, her work really unpacks the things that are left unsaid in that realm. So, through language, the languages of shape, color, light, matter, et cetera. And so maybe we can dive into the materials right now. This is a good moment to dig into that, because even in the sculpture here, we see like a pretty good mix of bronze, cherry wood, glass, in other works, beeswax.
It's a great
onion.
sculpture to start with, because it was called Table of Contents for that reason. The brain's working. I remember my titles. But yeah, I'd never shown in New York before. This was my first institutional show. I was, I had been making work for a little while already and had been building my vocabulary. But I like to be very aware of my audience and kind of what my audience might be bringing to an exhibition I make. And since I hadn't shown in New York before, I wanted to include a work that provided a kind of table of contents or a kind of introduction to the practice. So great selection. This work kind of, firmed up a lot of materials and explorations of those materials that I had been working with up until that point. And this show, again, was in 2017, so I've actually expanded a bit, but that's why this show's in the beginning of the slideshow and not later in the slideshow, because you'll see more materials and experimentations evolve as we progress in this conversation. But for this work in particular, I included not only wood and glass, which I had been working with for a little while, but also new, what I would say a direct burnout, which is that twig to the left. And if you go forward, I think there's a detail, yes, of this beetle that I actually found in my backyard. So over time, you know, it's always a funny moment to give a lecture. I feel like you're getting a snapshot and a bigger narrative. But I would say over time, I've increasingly been trying to sort out, you know, it's a common problem artists have, I think, maybe people have. You're making things, you're putting a lot of yourself into it, but then you want people to be able to access that. You don't want it to be alienating. So I've been slowly trying to figure out, I guess, how to bring in my own very personal experiences, but make those digestible for other people. So I'm not just talking about me, but I'm talking about kind of common issues, common experiences that we all encounter, but maybe I'm bringing my personal experience to the table in that bigger conversation. So that's a lot to say about a beetle. But that's maybe one little, yeah, but that's like one little like kind of way I've been trying to explore that over time.
Well, I think the level of detail in the works and the tableaus and the installations, and I think like this unique space that we had at Sculpture Center where you responded with these like very narrow, yeah, just even looking
Look at how difficult this space is. I mean.
It's a great solution, but bringing in the photography, but also there's like rope, the glass. I mean, I guess to just dig in deeper, like what do these, you know, how are you thinking about these individual mediums? Because I think, or materials, because I think the cherry wood and like even the frames that you use, like they're all very specific, and you have like, you come to those materials with a lot of knowledge and like respect for them. You're not trying to like turn them into something that you want to turn them into. It's actually like, they serve you're going to them because they serve a particular purpose or they do a particular thing. It's
a dance, yeah. It's, I'm not a director always. Sometimes there's a little like response that I need to listen to. At this point, I was working with cherry wood a lot because I was using a lot in glass blowing. And cherry wood's a big part of the glass blowing studio. A lot of tools are made out of cherry wood. And so I like this idea that they were brought back in as a display device. And a lot of these works that you're seeing in this hallway, you know, I think the space was so difficult and created so many different kinds of complex containers that I not only wanted to find a way to create works that responded to those containers, but I wanted the works to contain space themselves. So much of the glass was transparent, as you can see. You can't see it very well, but I would put very difficult to see objects in it. So you had to get very close and you were rewarded when you actually looked inside. These kind of horn-like forms, sometimes they'd have bronze objects hidden inside. I think if you go forward one more slide, yes, there you go. Exactly. And then the rope sometimes was also a way for me to sort of draw a line inside and outside a display device, an object, a container, a space. And I love that we positioned these by those holes that actually penetrated the architecture itself. So I was trying to also embrace the architecture that way.
And film too.
Yeah, I wish I could work with film more, but it's hard. It's hard to find places to even, you know, that even have the equipment. So I was really happy you were open to this because you never know when a medium dies.
Well, and this was I mean, it was very important to bring together all these elements of your practice in this show, I think, and including because you were working a lot with wax too, and you have like there's these candles in the nook here that were
in the chandlery.
Yeah. Yes, so I think it was really like all this coming together, and I think like there's a lot of transformation and change in your works too that's sort of built in, and just thinking through like that idea of like chemistry or materials evolving over time, or you know, how they're reactive in a certain way, and how you incorporate that or play with that in the work, and these kind of contrasts that you have like this with like the glass and the bronze, and just yeah, it's very evocative, but I wonder how you're. Yeah, like the sort of patina, if you could talk about that a little bit.
Patina, I mean, I left a patina at Sculpture Center. They say there's still wax in those alcoves. But yeah, patina's, you know, it's a nice word. I mean, sometimes I go back to photography, you know, when I think about time, and also, let's say, environment. You know, the darkroom's a really special space. I hear you still have a little darkroom here, which is very cool. But that space is, it's kind of a metaphor for me too, going into the dark room, going into this very different space where, you take things outside, you take things from, other worlds, other environments, other places, and you bring it back into this other very special, dark, enclosed, private space that has this very wonderful, cool, moist temperature to it, and the smell of the fix, and you see how much I love the dark room. I'm just gushing about it right now. Anyways, you take it there and you can see things happen. You see chance kind of come into play. You see an image that you thought you knew look very different. Something surprising comes out of it. And I think for me, studying photography in the early 2000s, kind of trying to find my way through digital, which never fully satisfied me as an artist, I came to realize chance was such an important part of what drew me to early photography. I love accidents in the dark room. I love slippage. I love accidents when the camera takes a shot slightly after when you thought it would. Something entered the frame that you weren't expecting. And for me, it's something I've always tried to embrace in the materials I use in my sculptures. So that's why you see things like candles getting really messy. You see, fire changing the forms of what I work with. Glass, it's a material that always pushes back for anyone who's worked with glass. And ceramics, which I haven't engaged with as much, I know is very similar. A lot of surprises happen in that kind of, what I would call dark room in my metaphor, but as a kiln in that instance. So yeah, that's kind of how I draw all that together. And patina is maybe another form of chance in that way.
And then maybe, we could dig into the relationship between your photographic work and sculpture, because there's always this idea of the image or the object being made out of a negative, and I think that's really fascinating, the sort of void, and we saw some images, but I'll keep scrolling through here because I think there's, or maybe back.
Yeah, you go back.
Tell me a good example. But there's this sort of hollowness or this emptiness, or in the photographs where you're also.
I mean, you could stop on the hand, actually,
okay.
the hand with the little twigs. Because even though they're both made of bronze, they engage two slightly different, this is getting in a nuance of making, but I feel like at Anderson Ranch I'm allowed to do it because this is a place of making. The twigs themselves are burnouts, meaning no wax was ever created, no mold at all was ever, no real mold was ever really created. It was just, what's the right word? It was just
the
rolled in
itself
slurry and burned out and then replaced with molten bronze. The hand, I do lost wax bronze casting, but using alginate, so I never have any duplicates of the casts I make. And referring to negatives, creating prints in the darkroom, I was always looking for a way to create almost like a more of a slide process where there was less mediation. And I like this idea that when you take a slide, back in the day, you would put slide film in, you would expose it so light would hit the subject, expose the slide, you develop the slide, and then you'd literally put that in a device that projected light. And so I liked how close that felt to the original subject. And so for me in sculpture, I've always been trying to find that kind of intimacy by using processes that are very close to the original subject. So I like this image because it kind of shows two examples of me trying to not only bring those, bring that kind of intimacy together in two different ways, but also bring two different kinds of natural worlds together.
And then with the photograms, there's also sort of X-ray quality to a lot of the works too, where you're using you're photographing your sculptures as photograms, or
and bringing the objects directly in the dark room. And it's I don't know, for me it was always about trying to get people to see the material in another way. So maybe you might think you know what you saw, but then I could show you the material in a different way, and then you might look again. So that was my little way of encouraging a deeper look.
And this is in the small courtyard of Sculpture Center. And this is a bronze of wax.
Yeah, and that was direct also. It was a big candle once that melted down a lot. And then I harvested the drippings and cast them directly in bronze. And that was my entry point into bronze casting, was making candles, which makes sense to some people and not to others. But I'll leave that to the Q&A if anyone wants to ask more about that.
And then this is here in town, and so was this your first public art piece, or?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you,
So-
Aspen. It was a good challenge. It worked out well. For me, this piece, I'd been making smaller versions of these sculptures, life-size versions called cultivators, and they were always cast in my hand at a 1-to-1 scale, human scale, and then I would make glass flowers that would intertwine with the hand. So again, looking at that other bronze version, it was kind of me now moving into glass and bronze versions of that sculpture that I was at Sculpture Center. For this, I was invited to make a larger version of it. And that was really exciting because I was trying to figure out what flowers I wanted to represent. And I remember looking at a lot of the native species in the area, and I decided to recreate some of those in glass because I really liked the idea that as people might see the sculpture and walk around Aspen, they might kind of look at their surroundings a little more closely and recognize flowers in the sculpture in their natural environment. But then I also created some psychedelic flowers because I don't know, it's like the first one I wanted to kind of also work the glass a bit. So there's this combination of native species and psychedelic, fantasy species.
And I mean, plants played a role in your work prior to this, so the incorporation of flowers and branches and trees and elements like that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit more about the role of like nature in that way, or plant life in your work?
Totally. I mean, the weeds that I started working with, the twigs, the beetle, and later this, it was always me looking at like local environments. I really like this idea of representing, showing work that represented the local natural environment. So again, there was like this extension of the work outside of the gallery or the institution. Later, but I've later started to look at even species that migrate, species that are threatened. So I like the idea that these sculptures kind of lend a different way of relating to plants you might see on a regular basis.
And then just, glass is supposed to be fragile, but here it's in public art. I'm just curious, like, how this works or how you make it, like.
It's a lot of R&D, and I can say more or less. I mean, it gets into like a technical level, but honestly, if somebody really wants to know, please ask, and I will entertain you with the details. I don't want to bore everyone with these details, but there's a way to do it, clearly.
This is up all seasons. It's like
it was up through the winter, which my friend, as a side note, my friend said that he was here that winter, and he said, I love watching people carry skis over their shoulder and then like turn right by the sculpture, which I was not expecting. I'm like, I'm ready for the environment. I'm ready for Aspen, and I was like, I'm not ready for people with skis over their shoulder.
I feel like that's like the public art thing is like you have to be able to take a hammer.
I was like terrified. No, and he told me like midway through winter, and I spent the rest of winter like, oh my God, is somebody gonna hit it with their skis? But yeah, it was fine. Part of it was I felt really grateful they let me do this because you don't know how sculptures go sometimes until you do it. I can't put it outside in LA. It's not going to teach me anything,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, what's not fragile is also sometimes what I think. They found candles in shipwrecks that have survived because they can take the salt water, so.
There's this like survivability, durability.
Yeah, it's like hard. I've had, somebody ship bronze badly and it broke. But,
Right.
We fix it, but, I'm kind of always like, what does fragile mean anymore?
Mm-hmm.
What way? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. These are really beautiful.
That's one of the psychedelic ones, if you can't tell.
You saw it in person? Okay.
I love that one.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And then you embarked on another public art project.
Yeah, this was shown outside the Clark Museum in Western Massachusetts. This work, I really, it's funny because it doesn't look like the work we just showed, but for me, it's very much about responding to the environment, just in a different way. I don't know how it came about, but the curators really wanted me to think about my relationship to photography. And so I created this, I think it's a 24-inch lens, basically. It's double concave, so it actually shrinks the environment. And I have to say, photos do this no justice because it's collapsing everything. But when you would see this work in person, it worked the way I wanted it to, which is that you could see things happen both naturally, unaided by the lens, and by the lens at the same time, because it would shrink the world. So I called it a device to see the world twice, because you were able to see things happen twice at the same time through it, which was very exciting to create something that was literally using elements of a camera, but as a sculpture. Oh God, yeah, and this really embraced chance. We had planned for it to be trained on this amazing tree, and I think 2 weeks before it was going to be installed, the tree fell down. Oh my God. It had been there years. The groundskeeper had been telling me, oh, I used to climb it as a boy. I love this tree. And they were like, what is Kelly going to say? And they were kind of like, oh, I don't know how you feel, maybe,
Well,
maybe we can change the location. And they showed me, and the tree had split open. They even said, oh, we can take the tree away, whatever. The tree had split open, and there was just life, like teeming out of this tree. And I said, oh my God, please don't move anything. This is honestly even better, And so we just kept everything the same, and we kind of cleared the path a little bit so people could walk up to where the tree had split open and even like investigate everything that had happened in there.
And so then you had another show at Francois, and this was like, I think also another moment that marked a turning point in a way, because you started bringing in, it's still in a similar language, but also these dirt plinths, and then
yeah, the rammed earth plinths, yeah.
Yes, and then also bringing in elements of your own family. So I think that's with the jewelry that was
the double excavation.
Yes, and so I wonder if you could just zoom out a little bit and just tell us about how you came to bring in your own family history into the works and the objects, because really you started with the objects. This show was October 2021, and my last show had been early 2020, before the pandemic started. And so I, like many people, were at home for a while. And I don't know what took me there, but on one hand, I'd always been very interested in stone carving, learning stone carving. And so the pandemic was a great time to learn, because you do it outside, you do it with masks on, so it was a very safe pandemic skill set to build up. So there was just this interest in working with stone. While I started doing that, I started, not only thinking about stone as a material and learning the history of stone carving, but also thinking about it metaphorically, what it meant to kind of excavate, unearth, dig up my own personal sedimentation. And I thought a lot, during the pandemic about a part of my family's history that they didn't talk about a lot, which was when my father and his family were interned during World War II in Poston, Arizona. So during the pandemic, I was able to go out there and visit the site. I have a friend, David Horvitz, whose family was also interned, and he told me at one point, he's made some work about internment camps as well, that the trees still standing there were from that time, because most of the camps were erected, pretty much all of them were erected in barren land that was just not really useful. A lot of Japanese Americans were sent to these like barren camps, which I've seen photographic evidence of. There was not a lot of life there. And a lot of them were farmers, so they were able to cultivate and irrigate and grow quite a bit. And I've seen photographic evidence of this as well. So basically, any trees still standing on these sites appear to be left over from that time. And so I went to see these trees. My father passed away about 20 years ago, so not only did he not talk about it, but I can't talk to him about it anymore. And so I thought, on a geological time scale, that was like a second ago that my father was there. So maybe by going back and seeing these trees, something would happen. I would understand something. I don't know what I was thinking, but I was searching for something.
And so being there and going through that, I decided to start making a body of work. You know, it's not so much that's like about internment, but it's so much about kind of the things in everybody in my family history and other people's family history that we don't know, and our inability to materially access that, but maybe our struggle to try to materialize that and understand that for ourselves. And so for me, this work is so much about trying to bridge that gap through materials, but also finding it to be fairly like fragmented, and you know, so much of making the search kind of the meaning of the work rather than this idea that something's going to materialize and explain everything for you. So I did that through, you know, stone, through incorporating my family's jewelry, heirlooms they gave me into the works.
Right,
Yeah, this is one. And I love that on one hand I can talk about this conceptually, but I can also show someone an heirloom that my grandmother gave me. And I feel like that really symbolizes these things that are passed down person to person that sometimes we do or don't know what to do with, or mean a lot or don't mean a lot to us, and we're struggling to, you know, understand what that is and kind of, you know, do something with it and bring it into the future.
And this is a ring.
Yeah, that
That's
was one of my grandmother's
on
rings, yeah.
A glass.
That I would wear too when she gave it to me.
A glass.
A glass
Of your
crystal
hand.
cast in
Or
my
crystal
hand,
cast,
yeah. And then the stone actually came from Poston, Arizona from one of my trips.
Because you were pulling elements from.
I did some, yeah, the
Poston.
branches or fallen branches from the trees. And yeah, the jewelry was from my family, the stones are from Poston. I later, and you'll see them in a bit, I also took photos of kind of these 3 major trees that are standing at Poston, Arizona. One of them's by a school that the internees built with clay bricks. And my father was 8 when he was there, so I have this idea that he went to that school.
And they and your family they were they were in Los Angeles. They lived in
Yeah.
Boyle Heights, right?
They lived in Boyle Heights, yeah, and
And
worked in Little Tokyo.
worked in Little Tokyo, and then
Yeah.
they were sent.
They were sent there for an unknown amount of time. Because when people were, now we look back and we say, okay, it was like 2 years. But at that time, you didn't know. You didn't know, and everything except one trunk was taken away.
And I mean, this is a history of this country that I think is little known or not often taught.
Not always known, yeah.
But you did a lot of research, because I remember you were going, because there was a center that.
The Poston Preservation
yes.
Group, yeah, I've worked with them. There's also 4 Native communities that converge there, and they do a lot of work to still talk about this history and how it intersects with the Native community there. They are the ones that actually told me that the irrigation built by the Japanese Americans that were interned has continued to this day, which is incredible. It formed the kind of backbone of today's irrigation, that part of the US.
And, well, let's keep going, because you also.
Yeah. And and then also alongside, you know, all of this, I thought, since I'm thinking about this kind of excavation of the self, I actually did this work, and I've done a couple works since then that I called Long Exposure. I carried over that title of that show into these works, and I actually carved myself using 3D scans of my body and 3-axis CNC with hand finishing of myself.
And then bringing like the organic material into it.
Yeah, because I didn't want it to just be stuck in the past. So we always disarrange a bouquet over it and then let those petals and everything kind of dry out as the exhibition or the duration of the show goes on.
We can talk more about this. And here's the photographs that you're.
Yes, this is at the
mentioning.
San Jose Museum.
And and I remember you talking about this, like imagining the trees that your family would, and others who were interned there would be looking at, being the same trees, and this idea of like also seeing from their perspective, you know, that kind of idea of this like meditation or, you know, being somewhere and just gazing upon a landscape, and then that not only becomes symbolic, but, you know, continues through time and all the history that, you know, came before and will come after, you know, what happens after. I think that that kind of longue durée is very, you know, not only long exposure, but like,
it's outside human perception. That's what I loved about that title, is it talks about a vision that's outside something a human on their own can perceive. And for me, you know, the trees, what I like about that too is they're the subject of this. You know, the world, they're the witnesses. These are all called witness. They're the witnesses to all these events. They're the witnesses to time and transformation. And I like that it kind of got out of a human perspective that way as well.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about these in relation to the family heirlooms too. Like what's intentionally passed on through jewelry or objects that you can carry with you and that have this other time scale because they are concrete objects in some way that can last. And then the idea of memory in relation to that is sort of fleeting or shifting and changing. There's really this this contrast that you're working with.
Yeah, definitely. And I got to take traditional photos, which was very exciting. This is a rare, I do a lot of experimental darkroom activities still, but this was an instance I was able to take some straight photos and do some, my training, mural printing. Who does that anymore? Me, I do. I love it. Like, get me in there. I'm like, yeah. Anyway, sorry, hold me back.
No, I mean,
Sometimes I've done these talks and I'm like, I could just talk about like materials and processes the whole time, but I'll talk about ideas and then you can ask me questions later.
I mean, you have like the technical skill. I mean, it's impressive, the knowledge you have and
I
technical
love this.
skills
I love that people are getting interested in analog photography again. It's very special, it should never die because digital can't replace it. It's not the same
totally
thing.
different,
And that's the problem. People are like, oh, it's going to be replaced. I'm like, they're not the same thing. They do different things.
It's totally different. And so you do see, are these the original buildings or are these?
These are the original, but some of them have been kind of like propped up in different ways. They got a grant, I can't remember how many years ago. They were able to kind of like prop up some structures. But for the most part, they're original. Some of them were repurposed at different points. But this building to the right is the schoolhouse that was hand built. And unfortunately, somebody set it on fire, I don't know how many years ago, so it's like the whole roof burned in. It's in really bad shape, but I know the Post and Preservation Project is trying to turn this into a site that can be visited with the support of the community.
Well, and then that takes us to this is
my most recent show. It opened February 19th of this year, yes.
So I think, I mean, it's an unplanned segue, but also just this, this real trauma that you just experienced.
You just went right into.
Well, it's
I can introduce it too.
Well, I mean, I think it's also, it's very recent and fresh, but you were impacted by the LA fires, and you can talk more about that. But just, I just want to also mention that kind of resilience that you were able to do your show that was originally planned, like right at that time, of course.
It was supposed to open January 30th.
Yes.
The work was supposed to be picked up January 20th, and the fire was January 7th, 8th,
Yeah. And you were able to save some remnants from your studio and incorporate them into the show, but also make new work.
Mostly new work.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of this is new.
Tell us, just tell us about this.
Yeah, I mean, people, they often say, what survived is often a first question, which the pedestals weren't there. The glass sphere in the center was not in Altadena, thank God. That was somewhere else. There's a couple bronzes I reclaimed after the fire, and that's it. Everything else was made after the fire because I've got great friends and a great community.
So you made all this work in like 2 weeks, basically? Or
like 3.
3 weeks.
But you forget, I went to grad school and made a thesis show, which,
Right,
I was like, I can do this, and I don't know, like I'm also around a lot of glass artists, and glass artists, they make things happen too, so I got it in me thanks to the support of a lot of people, my gallery, different people I work with, different friends I have, to pull it together in pull it together in a few weeks and execute the show, which I'm really proud of.
It's quite impressive, but I think it's also really important that you went ahead, and I think that's...
It was the right decision.
Yeah.
I was able to do it. And when we talked about this talk, it's, for anyone who doesn't know my practice, it's really important to me to talk about some of the topics we've brought up already. Because this show, and I think that everything that happened, it didn't create this like dissonance in the practice. It really kind of almost reinforced a lot of the topics and themes I've been talking about, which isn't always resilience, which is a big word people put into the show, because now, of course, a lot of the works that were even formulated or thought of beforehand became to represent that. But for me, it was also about impermanence, the natural world, which is the world we can't always control. It's very much about accepting things outside of our control and making what we can out of that. So yeah, that was all very important to me, that we touch on all these other topics before we got to this show.
So did it change much from what you were, I mean, I know it must be different, but just in terms of the ideas that you were working with and the things you were working with, like, do you feel like it changed, or it was more like an execution of what you had already set forward?
It really, sometimes when you don't have time to think too hard, you stay really true to yourself. I don't know how else to put it. I think when you have a good compass of what your values are, you can kind of just
keep going.
Commit. You just know you got to commit. So for me, I felt like it was all there. The groundwork was there, and I just had to do it. But I had to be present and kind of accept things for what they are. It's a little abstract, but I'm trying to describe a pretty intense moment. So some of it, more or less, we kind of re-executed them, but like the same stones didn't exist.
Sure.
I had to pivot. Probably the worst thing to me that there's a silver lining to what I'm about to say, was that speaking of all these heirlooms I incorporated in the past, I had this bag of doilies that my family had given me. They love having garage sales without telling me of my grandmother's stuff, because they know I'll hoard it all. And they came to me after a garage sale and said, "Nobody wants your grandmother's doilies. Do you want them?" And I was like, oh my God, yes, because I had been working on these Corten steel bases. And for me, Corten steel it has a lot of baggage for me as a sculptor and as a woman. It's not a material I ever thought I would work with, but I wanted a different kind of durational material with a different kind of patina. And I thought, Corten steel's really it, but how do I rise to all these big boys that came before me and their use of it? How do I make this mine? And when they gave me those doilies, I was like, thank you so much, this is it. I'm gonna put my grandmother's doilies on this Corten steel, and that is, I can't explain my work better to anybody than doilies on Corten steel.
You don't need words, it's all.
No, I'm like, that's it, and I feel like, the lost wax cast in my hand with my grandmother's heirlooms. It's gotten to this point where the materials start to kind of unpack the conceptual backing of the work in a way I don't want to try to overly articulate.
And what we're looking at right now is a glass sculpture.
This I could give a lecture about. This is a flamework borosilicate glass sphere.
And this is the patterning of the...
This is a general organic network patterning, but I could probably give a lecture about this in relationship to doilies that, again, I won't bore you with.
I just skipped ahead a lot.
It's okay, but maybe you could find a doily.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying.
But anyway, these patterns underneath were cutouts of the doilies. I did those late 2024. Really excited that I came to this solution. And then, unfortunately, all the doilies were in my house during the fire. So after the fire, I'm working the show, and I'm trying to convince myself I can come up with a really great story for everyone that the doilies were lost, but they're still in the memory of the sculpture. I'm really like, I can do this. And my family comes to me, and they said, "We didn't tell you, we took a bunch of doilies out before we gave them to you. You can have them back." And I was like, oh my God, thank God you did that. And that's why my grandmother's doilies still made it in the show. And crazy side story, I was there working with people at the burn site, and they found the doilies. I don't know how they survived. They've burned, they're black, they're broken apart a bit, but they're physically together, and I've preserved them for now. This is a mystery to many conservators. I've showed it to people. It's its own story, but that's kind of like my silver lining, is of all things, talking about fragility, the doilies survived the Eaton fire. No words. And because my family kept some doilies and were really nice and gave them back to me, they made them in the show.
Which you would have been mad if you knew before. Like, you know what I mean? But
I
It
mean,
all
I was
worked
just
out.
like,
It all
thank
worked
you.
out.
Yeah, thank you guys. And also that they gave them back. So yeah, anyways, yeah, I was able to kind of continue this, yeah, I feel like it really stayed on track somehow. I'm very lucky in some ways, yeah. These were all branches. I'll say these were works I thought about before the fire, and I thought, oh, I don't have the right branches. I don't want to use branches from the internment site again. I don't know what branches I'll use. I'll just, file it away. And then after the fire, I said, oh, I've got the branches now. And I went to Altadena and gathered all these branches and cast them and paired them with my body, and we just knocked that out like right away. Because when you have the idea, it's like you find the right material and association. It's easy to make the art.
And in this show, you also incorporated your body as well.
Yeah, and I made a new long exposure that was outside. I also made these, now I'm thinking of them almost like shelters. Like I've been thinking about these as almost little monuments and shelters. So that's probably the biggest change is I think a lot about
It's
shelter
like interior,
now.
like
Yeah.
using the interior space in a different way. 'Cause
Sometimes
it's
the
actually-
language comes to me a little later. Like people were talking about these like altars before, and now I'm like, sure, altar, but they're really like these, shelters in a way. So that's kind of where I am with the thinking
I think
around
the scale
these.
shift too, because you go into this this smaller world.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking about the Sculpture Center show too. It's kind of, I was thinking so much about those enclosures, those volumes as creating their own special spaces, and this is like a way of, I'm doing it now with stone.
And then more doily.
Yeah.
What's in between your hands?
That's a sweet gum pod, which I also had in a larger than life recreation in the show.
And so you had been using these partial body casts, like your hand. You had your torso.
Yeah,
But it was also in fragments. And then what we saw earlier with Francois' show, and then we'll,
See you in a
close
bit,
out
yeah.
this show with that full body form.
Yeah.
Here we go. This is, and I think in Francois' shows, I was really struck by the horizontality and this kind of like
Yeah.
funerary feeling, but also, in this version where it's vertical, it's also about monuments. I mean, there's so many associations that come up with this work, but before you talk about that, maybe talk more about that decision, which you touched on, to go from the always including a part of your body, like the hand, which is like the making and the creation and sort of points to process, to this idea of like the full realization of the body or the full presence of the body.
Yeah, it's hard for me to kind of unpack it better than you just did, to be honest. But yeah, again, thinking about like this full, or this idea of excavating my past or something like that, it didn't make sense to me. It was a fragment of the body. It made sense that it was the full body, and that it didn't have additional adornment, is what I would call it, that it was just a body, my body presented. But this sculpture, and I'm sorry, I recognize I don't have the other side of it, the front that was approached. It had a little twist because, of course, Listen, where I showed it, it's known for its history of working with minimalist artists. So I love that when you walked up, and this was the first thing you saw what looked like, just like a minimalist sculpture made of limestone, just this like formal kind of hunk of stone that was perfectly polished. And then you walked around and you saw this female figure, me, carved out of it. And there were little hints to it. We did melt some candles on it, so there was suddenly this patina added to it. But I like that I was, again, like playing with those big boys a little bit, and like, kind of like twisting it a little bit.
And then also in another public art, like, I mean,
This is currently at the Aldrich in Connecticut. And I actually made this piece a few years ago, but this was the first time I was able to see it presented the way that I wanted to see it presented, which is outside for a year.
and becoming overgrown, like taken over by
Yeah, so
nature.
the snow falls on and nature grows into it. It's essentially made of one of those blankets that has like little flowers individually. What's it called? Crocheted. And again, I could tell you a whole bunch of stories about how we made this, but we ended up casting about 9 individual crocheted flowers into bronze into wax that repeated this pattern. cast them into bronze individually and actually welded them back together, which I loved that the welding became like sewing all of a sudden. So I love this idea that these two different, very different craft associations like blended into one in this sculpture.
But that, I mean, it is interesting how you're talking about also like the doily or the delicate glass with the, you know, steel and like this kind of contrast of materials and, the fragile with the non-fragile. But I know we don't have like 10 minutes left, so maybe we
You're
wanna,
good on time. I haven't been paying attention. Okay, yeah, you got it. Okay.
I'm looking. But maybe we want to turn it over for any questions for me, Kelly. And I think Elsie has a mic. If anyone has, raise your hand. We can keep chatting, but, oh, yes. And I think there's a mic, so if you want to.
Thank you.
Over here.
Can you hear me?
In the
Hello? Okay. Hi, Kelly. Thank you. I had a question.
Oh, there's another. Okay, hi. I don't know where you are, but hi.
we have 2 mics.
Okay, hi, thank you. I had a question, Kelly, about the trajectory of longevity as a concept in your work. And the appearance of your full body and how those two things vis-a-vis are working together.
What do you mean by longevity?
Made out of stone, made out of durable materials, the transformation of things that are ephemeral into more durable materials. Not necessarily.
Like the mortal body being less durable than a stone body. Yeah. I mean, you know, again, like fragile means a lot of things to me because I've seen, you know, stones break and literally crumble at this point. I mean, for me, like I said, when I talked about going back to the site and this idea that a geological timescale is so vast that you know, the time between 2 generations is like a blip. I liked pairing my mortal body with this, let's say, longer time scale of a geological body for that reason. Like for me, it's almost like, I can't articulate it better, but it's like this shock of trying to reconcile 2 very different perceptions of time that intersect in one sculpture. That's how I would think about it, yeah. Does that answer your question though? Okay, good.
Michelle?
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for being here. We're thrilled to have you. I have a question, it's a practical question. That beautiful lacy glass globe that had the green flower, how do you transport that?
It's magic. No, a lot of pillow stuffing. A lot of pillow stuffing is the answer, like a lot of quilt stuffing. And yeah, we fill the whole thing with stuffing and the top. We put stuffing around it, and then we build a crate, you know, double lined with foam. I've shipped them across the country. It's not a problem with the right handling, but yeah, pillow stuffing's the magic ingredient. It's fun to pull it out. You're like.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. It's
thank
been
you.
a wonderful conversation. How many people do you estimate work with you to fulfill your work?
Oh yeah, that's fun. I bounce around a lot, so I don't have a big studio. I only have one studio manager that works 3 days a week, and me. Beyond that, I work at a glass shop with a really amazing gaffer, Kazuki Takazawa, and 2 wonderful assistants. But at this point, we kind of have cycled around a lot of other glass workers in the area, which is really fun. So we have a big community of people that kind of come in and out. And then I work with Danny Bressinger, who you introduced me to through the show still, who helped me make the globe. But I kind of like dip in and out. You know, like the foundry, I go, I bring stuff. I've been working there in person. They've been letting me use their shop a lot. But I kind of like leave and then go to like the stone carving community and work with Kevin there, Kevin Carmen, who's an incredible stone carver. And I'm either working on parts of it, or sometimes I'm hiring people to work parts, and I take it back and I add other parts. So it's very like meandering and fun, because you go to the stone shop and I tell them all about the glass shop, and they're like, oh my God, the glass shop. And then I go to the foundry and they're like, oh my God, the stone carvers, they're so cool. And I'm always like, come on, everyone, let's get together. But it never happens. Yeah.
Kelly, I have a question. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about notions of absence or negative space and how that plays into your sculptural narratives.
That's a great question, because it's, I think this work's also a nice representation of your question. For me, that's the struggle, and I talked a little bit about, baggage passed on from families, things you inherit that you don't know what to do with, and for me, that's been the struggle, is I've realized, people want to ask me a lot about what's your relationship to time. Talked about light, legacy, mortality. And I'm like, these are all pretty intangible, immaterial ideas. And at some point I realized my way of kind of attacking these ideas is to let them have space. So spirals have come up in my work a lot. You saw a lot of representations. Over time, I came to realize that's how I think and approach the practice too. So I'm sort of like spiraling around these like really big kind of existential topics, or like shared experiences. And I move around them, so they always maintain their immaterial negative space. But then I form different kinds of materiality around it, and yeah, that's the best way I can explain it. But it's very important to me, so thanks for asking that question.
Ruba, Kelly, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I didn't even need my water. I was like, I'm gonna.